Henry VIII's love life, not so reserved after all. Though he had 6 wives and many lovers, people often think of Henry VIII as a reserved person. However, Henry's relationships tell a very different story. Henry VIII's romantic life usually focuses on his marriages and his hope for a son, which is understandable given the importance of continuing his family line. Unlike Francis I of France, a king known for his many public affairs and health issues such as syphilis, Henry kept his love affairs private. He never had an official mistress, although he did offer the role to Anne Boleyn, who turned it down. People often remember Henry as overweight and injured in his later years, but he was quite handsome when he was younger. It seems we might be misunderstanding him. Henry was more private than prudish. He shared his secrets only with his closest advisors and friends, many of whom were executed in the 1530s, which might explain why we know so little about his private life. Henry liked to keep his relationships secret, and he managed to do so despite living in a bustling royal court. We know about 2 of Henry's mistresses because of specific historical records. Bessie Blount is remembered because she had a son with Henry that he recognised as his own. Normally, kings preferred to have affaired with married women, so any children could be claimed by the women's husbands. If Bessie had been married earlier, or her child had been a girl or had not survived, we might not have known her affair with Henry. Our knowledge of his affair with Mary Boleyn comes from Henry admitting it when he wanted to marry her sister, Anne. Without these bits of history, we might see Henry as completely faithful to his wives. There's also a lot of indirect evidence of Henry's affairs. For instance, in 1513, while in Lille before a battle, Henry spent a whole night dancing with a woman only known as Madame the Bastard. After he returned to England, a woman named Etoinette de la Baume, who knew Henry from Lille, wrote asking for help with her wedding, mentioning a promise he made her. These stories suggest Henry was far from the loyal husband. In 1514, Henry VIII got caught up in some court gossip. His friend, Charles Brandon, was flirting with 2 ladies at court and sending them gifts while he was away. Henry was supposed to help by passing along Charles's messages. That same year, Jane Poppincourt, a servant of Henry's sister Mary, wasn't allowed into France because she was considered immoral. Later, Henry chose her as a dance partner and gave her £100 to help her move on, which made people think that there might have been more than just friends. One of the most telling stories comes from 1537, when a man named William Webb claimed that Henry stole his girlfriend and was with her romantically, which at the time was considered adultery. There were also rumours about Henry having other children with different women, but he never confirmed these children as his own. Henry did acknowledge one illegitimate child, a son named Henry Fitzroy, who he had with his mistress, Elizabeth Blount. Fitzroy was the only one of Henry's children born outside of marriage that he recognised, but sadly, Fitzroy died young from tuberculosis. Back in those days, the church said that married couples should only have sex to comfort each other and have children, and that it should be done in moderation. Two doctors believed that not having sex could cause physical and mental health problems because it led to a build-up of fluids in the body. Although noble wives were expected to be very proper to ensure they had legitimate heirs, their husbands often looked for sexual pleasure outside their marriages, usually with women from lower social classes. During a wife's pregnancy, couples often advised not to sleep together, which could lead to the husband seeking company elsewhere. This exact situation led to a big scandal when Henry was suspected of being involved with one of his wife's, Catherine of Aragon's attendants, Anne Hastings. This rumour, fueled by the Spanish ambassador and Anne's sister, caused a huge fight between Henry and Catherine, marking one of their first major conflicts. Even though Henry VIII lived in a bustling royal court, he had many chances for private moments. He relied on his trusted friends to help him with secretive meetings. For instance, William Compton's house by the Thames was an ideal spot for quiet encounters, easily reached by boat. Thomas Wolsey also helped private spaces for Bessie Blount when she was expecting Henry's child, and even became the godfather. Despite the many eyes at court, Henry managed to find privacy in friends' houses in town, the countryside, or even in hunting lodges, where he travelled with only a few people, leaving his wife behind at court. He always brought his personal lock to ensure privacy wherever he went. Henry also used court events to flirt openly. He loves masks and dances, events where he could get close to women under the pretext of planning and rehearsing the shows. This included dancing and singing, which were often filled with playful and suggestive themes. Henry's royal household setup also made private meetings easier. The detailed and public rituals of preparing to sleep with his wife, involving many staff members and a ceremonial procession, contrasted sharply with how he managed his private time. At night, certain areas were kept highly private, only accessible with his permission and kept away from the public eye. Henry's servants, including Sir Henry Norris, played a key role in maintaining this privacy, staying silent and keeping watch. Norris, who later got caught up in a scandal with Anne Boleyn, kept many of Henry's secrets until his death. When discussing Henry VIII's relationship with Anne Boleyn, there are still some mysteries. People often say that Anne kept Henry interested by refusing him for 7 years before their secret marriage. During this time, Henry's wife Catherine was going through menopause, which started around 1525, and Anne didn't get pregnant until the end of 1532. Considering Henry was eager to have a son, it's hard to believe he remained celibate all that time. So, who was he with during these years? Well, there's a chance he occasionally slept with Catherine until they permanently parted ways. After Anne agreed to marry him, she might have allowed Henry some physical intimacy. In one letter, Henry mentions kissing Anne's breasts, which suggests that they were somewhat intimate, though they likely didn't go all the way. Anne didn't get pregnant until December 1532, which could mean they were careful or possibly used some sort of contraception like the Venus Club, a very early type of condom. These were costly, but Henry could afford them. Anne wanted to make sure she wasn't just another fleeting romance like her sister had been, and Henry didn't want to father a child until he could marry her. It's more likely, given the customs of the time, that Henry also had occasional flings, discreetly arranged by his close aides. They were seen as necessary physical needs, much like eating or sleeping. As Henry aged, his health issues, like his ulcerous leg and increased weight, made him much less agile, but these problems really only affected the last decade of his life. The younger Henry was quite the opposite, ensured his desires were met. The image of Henry as reserved might be due to the more lack of solid evidence at his actual lifestyle. Although not as openly adventurous as Francis I, Henry VIII definitely lived a lively romantic life. This tells us something about the nature of historical evidence too. For example, as late as 1817, historians debated whether Henry had been intimate with Mary Boleyn, as some thought such claims unfairly tarnished Anne's reputation. With all secrecy around his marriages, 5 or 6 marriages were conducted in private. It's clear Henry wanted to keep his personal life under wraps. Even now, hundreds of years later, he was largely managed to keep those secrets hidden.